So then, we are back with more understanding from the time of the second tabernacle services, and the scripture used is from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the existing manuscripts of the prophets of Israel, from the prophets of Yahweh, giving us then the understanding of the time of the end. So then, we can understand the time and the season. Also then, Yeshayahu, the 61st chapter, where we find ourselves during the time of restoration and reduction, and many of the questions coming regarding then the many prophecies of the prophets of old, such as then Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the many mysteries related with the number of days versus times and a half a time. So, understanding what the Messiah was explaining then during the time of the spring feast, he spent a couple of days with the Samaritans. However, when the Messiah was speaking with them, he used a language, obviously the holy language of the time of the Yom creation. It is a special word in Hebrew. However, later, when the Messiah then gave those 2 days, those were the literal days of creation. So then later, when the prophets were then mentioned, they mention in sets and seasons. As we find then the Messiah sometimes speaking with his disciples, or then the Shilishim, he obviously spoke to them using the original language. There was a person over there asking him how many times should the brother then encourage the other brother. How many times? The Messiah said first then 7 times 70. What he was explaining was he used the Yom creation, 7,000 and then 70 times above it. What he was saying is you have to encourage them until they can't count anymore. This is what the Messiah was trying to say. So he was not given then in a specific number of times a person should then encourage. 70 times 7. You don't do that. There is no meaning of it. You encourage until this age then is over with, and then continues on, always encouraging the brother to maintain the loyalty on the path of Yahweh. So then, from the time of the Messiah, he used specific Hebrew words, where then later, when the documents were translated, they decided to use days or yom as a regular time and season. It got screwed up, obviously. There is a special way of counting the times and the seasons in sets of times. Time and a half a time. Then the king of Babylon was then insane 7 times. There is a special way of using those words, and they are very distinct. When you are reading days, those were literary activity, making it simpler, but then they did not understand the special Hebrew word behind it. There is a special word in Hebrew related with the times and the seasons. There are special words used when there are seasons of the year. For instance, the counting of the Omer, there is a special Hebrew word. It is very specific, and those words are not interchangeable, because we are dealing then with a holy language. There is no synonymous. In Hebrew, each word has a definite understanding, because we are dealing with the Creator. There is no reason for similitude or then synonymous of words. There is no reason for it. So then in Hebrew of old, they were given specific words, and those were not interchangeable. So then a very important task for us is then studying the Messiah's words, the 490 days he spent on the earth. During the time of the spring feast, he used the original words and those words were translated in times and seasons as per the way it was in the past. Later, when those documents were translated, those people then they began to interchange those words and screw up what the Messiah was explaining. When the Messiah spent time with the Samaritans, he gave them 2 days special words in Hebrew regarding the creation or Yom creation. When he was spending time with his Shilishim, he gave 7 days Yom, obviously because it's 1,000, and then times 70. We have to understand what the Messiah is trying to say. Obviously, it's very important then doing a very thorough research and then finding out those special Hebrew words. Those words, they have only a meaning and a meaning only. Those words are not interchangeable and they have a specific meaning. In many of the other languages of the world, the 70 languages then, when they were confused during the time of the Tower of Babel, we find then words similar. There is no such in Hebrew. It's very specific. So then, we then understand the time of Daniel when he was explaining time and a half a time, and then later the literary activity then translated into days makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. But we do understand when the Messiah spent time with Samaritans was then 5031. He was born in 4999. 2,000 years later, after 5031 makes 7031, where then the time of Gentiles, or then the Yom creation, given them as the understanding of the time of the Gentiles in the earth, would then expire. So then I began to understand the times and the seasons and the importance of understanding the words of ancient Hebrew. It is extremely important. However, whatsoever the prophets were explaining, those were obviously related with those special words in Hebrew. Later, have these in mind. Because of the fact it was already taking place, many times they began to change to make it simpler. Should never be used this way. Should be then recorded as per the original, so then the loyalty and integrity of the scriptures then remain intact. An example was then Job or Job. He was not righteous. He had a pride problem in his life and he was then disciplined. However, back then it was very popular for the Hebraic people to have a similitude. Only because a person is rich means a person then is righteous. And there is no righteous word in Hebrew. Or having favor before the Creator. Because a person is rich. There is no link with it. During this time we find then Job had a pride problem because he was so rich and he began to boast. However, when you read the original manuscript, you find the translation as himself as being favored. Yes, he was favored, but he had taken his favor advantage of the situation and he became boastful. Thus he was then disciplined. The same way, when we understand then the times and a half a time and so on and so forth, has to end in 7031 before the reduction. So what we have to understand is this. Whatsoever the prophets spoke in the past regarding the times and seasons, and a half a time and a time and a half a time and so on and so forth, there is yet a time of reduction upon these numbers. We have to have these in consideration because the Messiah spent 2 Yom creation days with the Samaritans. But then he explained 2 days as per literal days, signifying 2 Yom creation days. whatsoever the prophets spoke in the past is subjected then to reduction. Because the Messiah said if it wasn't then for the reduction of time, then the elect would not survive. Speaking of the returning of the holy services. We have to understand what the Messiah was explaining so then we can verify and understand then via those special words, and then when we find those words, then we have to understand what is the characteristic of the time prophetic versus the time given to the Gentiles. Time of the Gentiles we know is going to be reduced. However, the time of the prophecy, these we must then explore, because those are dual levels and they do not relate with each other. They must not, because we are speaking in two layers. One of them is then the 2,000 years given to the Gentiles, the other is heaven's layers. And we have to understand those words to make sure those then are in line with the original Hebrew. Because there is a time reduction, and obviously, if we take those understandings from the time of the prophets as per Gentile time, then would be reduced. But it's not the case. The case is we find in the layer of the prophetic intact, and the Messiah, obviously, he knew it. But there is a gap of time related with them where then those prophecies are subjected to reduction in Gentile level only. So it should reveal to us a time reduction as those prophecies are studied. Because the Messiah said the time would be reduced. It's very important to understand then dual layer, heaven's layer and then earth's layer. So then I began to understand what the Messiah said, the time being reduced for the sake of the elect, Gentile level-wise. So then we began then our quest, understanding then time and a half a time, and then all those days used, they were not days. Those are subjected to reduction if you then line up Gentile and prophetic. The Messiah said, and he was very specific. He did say the time would be reduced. However, when he's speaking of prophecy, you can't reduce time from prophecy. Those were given as they were. So because we can't reduce prophetic time, because those were the words of Yahweh, can give us then a rough understanding of the time of the end, including the reduction. So those words must be found then and searched through, because then we can find somewhat what it means then the time of the completion of the prophecies. Very important point. So please stay tuned, much more coming up, because then you're going to understand a bit of Hebrew besides the word Yom as day, but then Yom creation day versus then times and seasons. How many times were related with the holy Mikras, Moadim or Moed, the holy feasts. How many times feasts? How many years? How many times? And then were the counting, as we understand, there is the counting of the Omer and the other types of counting related, as you can study from the prophets. However, there is a definite understanding from heaven's layers, understand the prophetic without reduction. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any kind of a reason for the prophets in the past to state a certain time or season until a prophetic event takes place. But then there is a reduction of time of the Gentiles. So there is a way of finding a rough estimate of the time of reduction. And those can be calculated. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.